Right now, as you're watching this, reach for something. Your phone, a coffee cup, the edge of your desk. Go ahead, touch it. Feel that solid connection between your skin and the object. That sensation of contact, of two things meeting in the physical world. Here's what will shatter everything you think you know about reality. You have never, not once in your entire life, actually touched that object, or anything else for that matter. This isn't philosophy. This isn't a thought experiment. This is hard science, and it's about to unravel the most basic assumption you have about existing in this world. Every handshake you've given, every kiss you've shared, every surface you've felt beneath your feet, all of it has been an elaborate illusion performed by forces you can't see, operating at scales you can't imagine. The atoms that make up your finger are surrounded by clouds of electrons, spinning and buzzing in their orbital dance. The atoms in that object you just touched? They have their own electron clouds, their own invisible barriers. When you think you're touching something, what's really happening is that the electron clouds are repelling each other through electromagnetic force. Your finger stops moving toward the object, not because you've made contact, but because the electromagnetic fields are pushing against each other with incredible strength. You are literally hovering above everything you've ever touched, by distances that, at the atomic scale, are vast. If an atom were the size of a football stadium, the nucleus would be a marble at the center, and the electrons would be tiny specks orbiting somewhere in the upper bleachers. The rest? Empty space. You are mostly empty space, reaching toward objects that are mostly empty space, and the illusion of touch is created by invisible forces keeping these empty spaces apart. But here's where it gets even stranger. That sensation you feel, that convincing experience of contact. Your brain is constructing that entire reality from electrical signals. Pressure sensors in your skin detect the electromagnetic repulsion, translate it into nerve impulses, and your brain interprets those signals as touch. You're not feeling the object. You're feeling your own nervous system's interpretation of forces you cannot directly perceive. This revelation leads us to a question that has haunted humanity for millennia. If something as fundamental as touch is an illusion, what else about our reality might be constructed? What else might be a convincing simulation created by our limited senses and pattern-seeking brains? 2,500 years ago, a Greek philosopher named Democritus stared at the world around him and came to a radical conclusion that would prove prophetic. He proposed that everything, every rock, every tree, every human being was made of invisible, indivisible particles he called atoms. Most of his contemporaries dismissed this as absurd. How could solid, real objects be made of things too small to see? How could the rich, textured world of experience be nothing more than tiny particles bouncing around in empty void? Democritus couldn't have known that his atoms were themselves mostly empty space. He couldn't have predicted that his invisible particles would reveal touch itself to be phantom sensation. But he understood something profound that would take science 2 millennia to rediscover. Appearances deceive us. The reality we perceive is not the reality that exists, and if touch, the most immediate, undeniable sense we possess, is an illusion, then we must ask ourselves, what other fundamental aspects of our experience might be elaborate constructions? What happens when we start pulling at this thread? When we begin to question not just what we touch, but what we see, what we hear, what we think we know about consciousness itself? The answer to that question will take us to places stranger than you can imagine. Because if nothing is truly solid, If nothing is truly touched, then perhaps nothing is truly real in the way we've always believed. Picture a winter night in 1619. A young French philosopher sits alone by his fireplace, staring into the dancing flames. René Descartes has just made a decision that will fracture human understanding forever. Tonight he will doubt everything, not just the things he's unsure about, everything, every belief, every assumption, every piece of knowledge he's ever accepted as true. He starts with the obvious targets. The senses lie constantly. That stick looks bent in water but feels straight in your hand. The sun appears to circle the earth, but mathematics suggests otherwise. Dreams feel real while you're dreaming them. So how do you know you're not dreaming right now? But Descartes doesn't stop there. He goes deeper, applying his methodical doubt like acid that dissolves certainty itself. What if there's an evil demon, he wonders, powerful enough to deceive him about everything? What if this demon can manipulate his thoughts, create false memories, fabricate entire experiences? What if everything Descartes thinks he knows about the world, the fireplace, his body, the very room around him, is nothing but elaborate deception? Most people would pull back from this brink. Most people would say, "This is ridiculous. Of course, the world exists." But Descartes presses forward into the vertigo, and what he discovers there changes everything. If he doubts everything, there's still one thing he cannot doubt: the fact that he is doubting. To doubt, he must think. To think, he must exist. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. This becomes the single, unshakable foundation upon which he tries to rebuild knowledge. But here's what Descartes didn't fully grasp. He had just opened a philosophical Pandora's box that would never close. Because if the only thing you can be certain of is your own thinking mind, then what about everything else? What about other people? What about the physical world? What about the very reality you think you're inhabiting? Welcome to solipsism, the terrifying possibility that you are the only conscious being that exists. Everyone else, every conversation you've ever had, every relationship you've cherished, all of it might be elaborate constructions of your isolated mind. Your parents, your friends, your lovers, they could be nothing more than sophisticated mental projections, as unreal as characters in a dream. This isn't just abstract philosophy. This is a genuine possibility that serious thinkers have grappled with for centuries. If consciousness is all you can truly know, then the existence of other conscious beings becomes an article of faith, not knowledge. You assume other people have inner lives like yours, but you have no direct access to those inner experiences. For all you know with absolute certainty, you could be completely alone in existence. The implications spiral outward like cracks in ice. If you can't be certain other minds exist, can you be certain about anything in the external world? What if your brain is floating in a vat of nutrients, connected to electrodes that stimulate it to create the illusion of embodied experience? What if some advanced civilization has trapped your consciousness in a simulation so convincing that you mistake it for reality? This isn't science fiction speculation, it's a logical extension of Cartesian doubt. In the 1980s, philosopher Hilary Putnam formalized this nightmare scenario. Imagine your brain, removed from your skull, sustained in a laboratory vat. Scientists feed it electrical impulses that perfectly simulate the experience of having a body, of living in a world, of touching objects that we've already established you've never actually touched anyway. How would you know? What test could you perform? What evidence could you examine that wasn't itself part of the simulation? The VAT scenario is philosophically airtight. There is no way to definitively prove you're not experiencing it right now. But the horror goes deeper. What if there is no VAT? What if there are no scientists? What if reality is even stranger? What if you're a brain spontaneously formed by quantum fluctuations in empty space, complete with false memories of a life you never lived, experiencing hallucinations of a world that never existed? This is where Descartes' innocent fireplace meditation leads us, to the possibility that everything you believe about reality is wrong, that every shared moment, every connection, every experience of the physical world is nothing but the solitary hallucination of a consciousness that might be the only thing that exists. And here's the truly unsettling part. Modern science, instead of rescuing us from these philosophical nightmares, has made them more plausible than ever. Quantum mechanics reveals that reality at its foundations behaves in ways that seem impossible. Neuroscience shows us that everything we experience as reality is actually constructed by our brains from incomplete sensory data. The world Descartes shattered by his fireplace has never been put back together. We're still living in the ruins of that demolished certainty, trying to navigate a reality that might not be real, surrounded by minds that might not exist, in bodies that might be illusions, and we're just getting started. Reality died in 1927, and a cat killed it. Not literally, of course. The cat was imaginary, dreamed up by a physicist named Erwin Schrödinger, who was desperately trying to show his colleagues how absurd their new theory had become. But that imaginary cat, simultaneously alive and dead, until someone opened its box to look, became the perfect symbol for how quantum mechanics had murdered our intuitive understanding of what it means for something to exist. The assassination began innocently enough, in laboratories across Europe, where scientists were firing particles at screens with 2 slits cut into them. Simple experiment. Predictable results. Fire a particle through the slits. It goes through one or the other. Hits the screen behind. Elementary physics. Except that's not what happened. When scientists fired electrons one at a time through the double slits, something impossible occurred. The electrons created an interference pattern, stripes of light and dark that could only form if each individual electron somehow went through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself. A single particle, taking multiple paths, existing in multiple places at once. Werner Heisenberg stared at these results and felt reality crumble beneath his feet. How could one particle travel through 2 separate openings? How could something exist in multiple states simultaneously? The mathematics worked perfectly, but the implications were terrifying. Reality, at its most fundamental level, didn't behave like reality at all. But the nightmare was just beginning. Because when scientists decided to watch which slit each electron actually went through, everything changed. The moment they added detectors to observe the particle's path, the interference pattern vanished. The electron suddenly behaved like a normal particle, going through one slit or the other, but never both. The act of observation had altered reality itself. Think about what this means. It suggests that particles don't have definite properties until they're observed. Before measurement, an electron exists in what physicists call superposition, a ghostly combination of all possible states. It's not that we don't know which slit it went through. It genuinely went through both slits, and neither slit, and every possible path between them. Schrödinger found this so disturbing that he devised his famous thought experiment to expose its absurdity. Place a cat in a box with a radioactive atom that has a 50% chance of decaying within an hour. Connect a Geiger counter to a hammer that will shatter a flask of poison if the atom decays. According to quantum mechanics, until someone opens the box to observe the outcome, the atom exists in superposition, both decayed and not decayed, which means the cat must also be in superposition, both alive and dead. Schrödinger intended this as a reductio ad absurdum, proof that quantum mechanics must be incomplete. Instead, he accidentally created the most famous illustration of quantum reality. The cat really is both alive and dead until the box is opened. Observation doesn't just reveal reality, it creates reality. This demolition of common sense sent shockwaves through the scientific community. Einstein famously declared that God does not play dice with the universe, refusing to accept that reality could be fundamentally probabilistic. He spent decades trying to find hidden variables, secret mechanisms that would restore determinism and objective reality. He failed. Decades of increasingly sophisticated experiments have confirmed quantum mechanics' strangest predictions. Particles really do exist in multiple states simultaneously. Observation really does collapse these superpositions into definite outcomes. The universe really does seem to be constructed from probability waves that materialize into concrete reality only when someone bothers to look. But here's where it gets even stranger. What counts as observation? Does it require a conscious observer? A measuring device? Where exactly does the quantum world end and the classical world begin? These questions remain unanswered, and each potential answer carries devastating implications for the nature of reality. If consciousness is required to collapse quantum superpositions, then reality might literally depend on minds to exist. Without observers, the universe would be nothing but ghostly probability waves, neither real nor unreal, suspended in mathematical limbo. This would make consciousness not just important, but fundamental, the force that transforms possibility into actuality. Alternatively, if any interaction counts as measurement, then the classical world we experience might emerge gradually from quantum foundations through an incomprehensibly complex web of constant observations. Reality would be constantly recreating itself, moment by moment, as quantum possibilities crystallize into definite outcomes. Either way, the solid, objective reality our ancestors took for granted is gone forever. In its place, we have something far stranger. A universe where the very act of looking changes what we see, where particles exist in impossible combinations of states, where reality itself seems to flicker in and out of existence depending on whether anyone's paying attention. The mathematics had spoken, and what it said was impossible. Yet here we are, living in that impossibility. In 2003, a philosopher named Nick Bostrom published a paper that would haunt Silicon Valley billionaires and keep physicists awake at night. Using nothing but statistics and logic, he proved something that sounds like science fiction. If it's possible to create realistic simulations of conscious beings, then you are almost certainly living in one right now. The math is devastatingly simple. Imagine a technologically advanced civilization that develops the ability to run detailed simulations of their ancestors. Complete universes populated by billions of simulated beings who believe they're real. Each advanced civilization might run thousands of these simulations for research, entertainment, or education. Now, here's the kicker. For every one real person in the advanced civilization, there would be thousands or millions of simulated people living in artificial worlds. If you're a conscious being randomly selected from this pool, what are the odds you're one of the rare, real ones? The statistics are crushing. You're overwhelmingly likely to be simulated, Elon. Musk absorbed this argument and declared the odds we're living in base. Reality to be billions to 1 against. When one of the world's most successful technologists, someone building rockets and neural interfaces, tells you reality is probably fake, it's worth paying attention. But Bostrom's argument gets more unsettling the deeper you dig. He presents a trilemma. Either advanced civilizations go extinct before developing simulation technology, or they develop it but choose not to run ancestor simulations, or we're almost certainly in a simulation. There's no fourth option. One of these three statements must be true, and none of them is comforting. The extinction option suggests something catastrophic awaits every civilization that reaches our level of technology. The abstinence option implies that advanced beings lose interest in understanding their past or creating simulated worlds. But the simulation option, that's the one that reframes everything you think you know about existence. Look around you. Notice how reality has certain qualities that might hint at computational shortcuts. Why does quantum mechanics seem to process information in discrete units? Why does there appear to be a fundamental pixel size to space-time itself, a Planck length, below which measurement becomes meaningless? Why do the laws of physics seem to follow mathematical equations so precisely? These could be the fingerprints of a simulation running on some unimaginably powerful computer. The quantum uncertainty principle might be computational approximation. The speed of light might be a processing limit. The discrete nature of matter and energy might reflect the digital architecture underlying our simulated reality. Consider how rapidly our own simulation capabilities are advancing. 50 years ago, Pong was cutting edge. 2 white rectangles bouncing a square dot between them. Today, we have photorealistic graphics that can fool the human eye. Video game characters display complex emotional expressions. Artificial intelligence generates human-like responses to any question. Now project that progress forward 1,000 years, or 1,000,000. What kind of simulations might a civilization create when they have computational power that dwarfs our current capacity by factors we can't even comprehend? They could simulate entire universes down to the quantum level, complete with billions of conscious beings who never suspect their reality is artificial. And here's where it gets deeply strange. Those simulated beings might develop their own simulation technology. They might create their own artificial worlds populated by conscious entities. We could be simulations creating simulations, nested inside simulations, in an infinite hierarchy of artificial realities. This isn't a new fear. The ancient Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi famously dreamed he was a butterfly, then woke up uncertain whether he was Zhuangzi, who had dreamed of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being Zhuangzi. The Hindu concept of Maya suggests that the physical world is an illusion obscuring deeper reality. Plato's allegory of the cave depicts prisoners mistaking shadows on a wall for reality itself. But modern simulation theory adds technological precision to these ancient intuitions. We're not just asking whether reality might be illusion, we're calculating the specific probability that our entire universe is a computer program. The implications are staggering. If you're in a simulation, what happens when it ends? Are you backed up somewhere? Can you be copied, paused, restarted? Do the beings running your simulation have moral obligations toward you? Are they even aware you exist? Or are you an emergent side effect of some other computational process? Some physicists have proposed experiments to detect simulation signatures, looking for computational artifacts in the cosmic microwave background radiation, searching for glitches in physical constants, testing whether space-time is quantized at the smallest scales. But there's a fundamental problem. Any evidence we find could itself be simulated. The beings running our simulation might want us to believe we're real. They might carefully edit out any glitches, smooth over any computational shortcuts, maintain the illusion perfectly, or they might not care whether we figure it out. We could be powerless to escape anyway. This creates a new kind of existential vertigo, not just the possibility that reality is illusion, but the specific, calculable probability that your entire life story is nothing but information processing in some vast computer. Your memories, your relationships, your hopes and fears, all of it potentially artificial, despite feeling absolutely authentic to you, and perhaps most disturbing of all. If you are in a simulation, the beings who created it might be simulated too. There could be no bottom level, no base reality, just simulations all the way down. An infinite stack of artificial worlds, each convinced of its own reality, each potentially as real or as fake as any other. The dreaming machine might be dreaming of dreaming machines forever. You are the only thing in the universe you can prove exists. Not your body, not your brain, not the chair you're sitting in, or the device you're watching this on. The only thing you have direct, undeniable access to is the stream of conscious experience flowing through your mind right now. The redness of red, the pain of pain, the specific quality of what it feels like to be you. Everything else is inference. Everything else is assumption. But consciousness, that's the one thing that announces itself with absolute certainty every moment you're awake. Yet somehow, it's also the one thing science can't explain. We can map every neuron in your brain. We can watch electrical storms cascade across your cortex. We can predict with startling accuracy which thoughts you'll have before you have them. But we cannot explain why any of this creates the felt experience of being conscious. Why should there be anything it's like to be you? This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. And it's not just difficult. It's categorically different from every other scientific challenge we've faced. When we couldn't explain lightning, we discovered electricity. When we couldn't explain disease, we found germs. But consciousness isn't just mysterious. It's the very thing that experiences mystery. Think about the color red, not the wavelength of light that triggers certain cells in your retina, not the neural firing patterns in your visual cortex, the actual subjective experience of redness, that quail that fills your awareness when you see a fire truck or a rose. Scientists can tell you everything about how your brain processes red light, but they cannot tell you why processing that information should create the inner experience of redness. This isn't a gap in our knowledge that more research will fill. It's a fundamental category error. We're trying to explain subjective experience using objective methods, trying to capture the interior of consciousness from the outside. It's like trying to explain the experience of music by analyzing the physics of sound waves. You can describe the mechanisms perfectly while missing the phenomenon entirely. Some neuroscientists brush this aside, Claiming consciousness is just an illusion created by complex information processing. But this misses the point entirely. Even if consciousness is an illusion, something must be experiencing that illusion. The hard problem isn't explaining how brains work. It's explaining why anything should experience anything at all. Here's where things get really strange. What if we've got the relationship between mind and matter backwards? What if consciousness isn't something that emerges from complex arrangements of unconscious matter, but something fundamental to reality itself? This idea, called panpsychism, suggests that consciousness is a basic feature of the universe, like mass or charge. Just as electrons have charge and quarks have mass, perhaps all matter has some primitive form of consciousness. Complex brains don't create consciousness. They organize and amplify the consciousness that was already there. It sounds crazy until you realize the alternative is even crazier. That unconscious particles somehow magically become conscious when arranged in sufficiently complex patterns. That's like saying letters become meaningful by being arranged into words. Except consciousness isn't meaning, it's the very capacity to experience meaning. Philosopher David Chalmers has pointed out that we might need to fundamentally revise our scientific worldview to accommodate consciousness. Just as physics had to incorporate the weirdness of quantum mechanics and relativity, perhaps we need a science that treats consciousness as irreducible, something that can't be explained away, but must be explained with. This connects to an even more radical possibility: idealism, the view that consciousness is all there is, that matter, space, and time are all constructions within consciousness rather than consciousness being a construction within matter. From this perspective, the external world doesn't create conscious experience. Conscious experience creates the appearance of an external world. Berkeley famously argued that to be is to be perceived. Nothing exists except minds and their ideas. Modern idealists like Bernardo Kastrup suggest that individual consciousness is like a whirlpool in an ocean of universal consciousness. We feel separate, but we're really localized patterns in the same underlying mental reality. This might explain why reality seems so strange when we examine it closely. Quantum mechanics tells us that particles don't have definite properties until observed. Simulation theory suggests our reality might be purely informational. The hard problem of consciousness reveals that subjective experience is categorically different from objective matter. What if these aren't separate mysteries, but different aspects of the same fundamental truth? What if consciousness isn't in the universe, but the universe is in consciousness? Consider this possibility. You're not a conscious being having experiences in an objective reality. You're an experience that a universal consciousness is having. Your individual awareness is like a dream that cosmic mind is dreaming, complete with the illusion of being separate from other dreams, other minds, other experiences. This would mean consciousness really is the only thing you can prove exists. Not because everything else is uncertain, but because everything else is consciousness in disguise. The conspiracy isn't that consciousness is hiding in matter. The conspiracy is that matter is hiding in consciousness. And if that's true, then you're not just the only thing you can prove exists. You might be the only thing that does exist, experiencing itself as everything else. Ancient mystics predicted what modern science discovered, and they did it without particle accelerators, quantum computers, or philosophical thought experiments. Thousands of years before Schrödinger's cat and simulation theory, human beings across completely separate cultures came to the same startling conclusion. Reality is not what it appears to be. In ancient India, Hindu sages developed the concept of Maya, the cosmic illusion that veils ultimate reality. According to this tradition, everything we perceive through our senses is a kind of magic trick performed by consciousness itself. The solid world, our individual identities, even time and space are all elaborate constructions hiding the true nature of existence. But Maya isn't just any illusion. It's specifically described as a creative power that makes the one appear as many, the eternal appear as temporal, the infinite appear as finite. Sound familiar? Modern physics tells us that the diversity of matter emerges from quantum fields. That time might be an emergent property, rather than fundamental reality. That the universe might be information rather than substance. The ancient texts go further. They describe consciousness as the fundamental substrate of reality, with individual minds being temporary modifications of universal awareness. This isn't metaphor. It's presented as literal truth. Individual consciousness is like a wave on the ocean of cosmic consciousness, appearing separate, but never actually disconnected from the whole. 2,500 years ago, Buddha reached similar conclusions through a different path. His investigation into the nature of suffering led him to discover that the self is an illusion, a story constructed by the mind from constantly changing physical and mental processes. There is no permanent, unchanging essence that makes you, you. What you call your identity is actually a stream of experiences that the mind links together into a narrative of continuity. Modern neuroscience confirms this. Ancient insight. There is no single location in the brain where you exist. No central command center, no unified self that experiences all your experiences. Instead, consciousness appears to be an ongoing construction, moment by moment, from distributed neural processes. The self is exactly what Buddha said it was. A compelling story with no permanent narrator. But perhaps the most prophetic ancient insight comes from Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners chained in darkness mistake shadows on the wall for reality itself. One prisoner escapes, sees the true world illuminated by sunlight, then returns to tell the others. They refuse to believe him. The shadows are so convincing, so consistent, that the prisoners prefer their familiar illusion to an incomprehensible truth. Replace the cave with our universe, the shadows with the phenomena we observe, and the sunlight with whatever reality might exist beyond our perceptual limitations. Plato wasn't just telling a story about enlightenment. He was describing the human condition. We're all prisoners, mistaking the shadows of reality for reality itself. What's remarkable is how these ancient traditions converge on insights that modern science is only beginning to grasp. The Hindu concept of Maya aligns with quantum mechanics' revelation that particles exist in superposition until observed. Buddhist teachings about the constructed nature of self-echo neuroscience, discoveries about the brain's narrative-creating mechanisms. Plato's cave allegory parallels simulation theory's suggestion that we might be trapped in artificial reality. These aren't coincidences. They're evidence that human consciousness, when pushed to its limits through contemplative practice, naturally discovers certain truths about the nature of existence. The mystics weren't making things up. They were reporting back from the frontiers of consciousness research. Consider the Advaita Vedanta teaching that Tat Tavam Asi, thou art that. This suggests that your individual consciousness is identical to the universal. consciousness that creates and sustains all reality. You're not a separate being observing the universe. You are the universe observing itself through the lens of apparent individuality. This ancient insight provides a startling perspective on all our modern mysteries. If consciousness is fundamental and individual minds are modifications of universal consciousness, then of course, reality changes when observed. The universe is literally watching itself and responding to its own attention. Of course, touch is illusion. There's no real separation between observer and observed. Of course, we might be in a simulation. We're simulations that universal consciousness is running within itself. The prisoners in Plato's cave weren't just metaphorically chained, they were epistemologically trapped by the limitations of embodied perception. But here's the twist the ancient traditions understood. The prisoners, the cave, the shadows, and even the sun beyond are all appearances within the same fundamental consciousness. We are the prisoners of Maya, convinced of our separation, mistaking our individual awareness for all there is. But we are also the consciousness creating Maya, playing an elaborate game of hide-and-seek with ourselves. The prison and the prisoner are one. The shadows and the light are one. The ancients knew what we're just rediscovering. Reality isn't hiding from us. We're hiding from ourselves. Perhaps the question is more important than the answer. We've journeyed through atoms that never touch, philosophers who doubted everything, quantum mechanics that murdered certainty, simulations nested within simulations, consciousness that defies explanation, and ancient wisdom that anticipated it all. We've discovered that every attempt to pin down reality reveals new layers of mystery beneath. You might expect this to be terrifying, to live in a universe where nothing is certain, where reality itself might be illusion, where consciousness could be the only thing that exists or the one thing that doesn't. But there's something liberating about embracing this uncertainty, something beautiful about living permanently inside the question mark. When you stop demanding that reality conform to your expectations, something remarkable happens. The pressure to have definitive answers dissolves, replaced by a deeper appreciation for the mystery itself. Every moment becomes extraordinary not because you understand it, but because it exists at all. Whether that existence is real, simulated, or pure, consciousness doesn't diminish its immediacy. Consider what you've gained by questioning everything. You've touched the foundations of existence and found them stranger than any fiction. You've glimpsed the possibility that consciousness is fundamental, that reality emerges from observation, that the universe might be information experiencing itself. These aren't conclusions to be proven or disproven. They're invitations to wonder. The ancient mystics understood this. They didn't seek to solve the mystery of existence, but to live more fully within it. They recognized that the question, "What is real?" transforms the questioner. The journey matters more than the destination, because the journey is all we ever actually have. Here's the final paradox that brings us full circle. Even if absolutely nothing is real, if you're a brain in a vat, a character in a simulation, a dream in the mind of some cosmic consciousness, one thing remains undeniably true. The experience of questioning reality is happening. Right now, the doubt is real, even if everything being doubted is illusion. You cannot doubt the reality of doubt itself. You cannot simulate the experience of wondering whether you're simulated without actually having that experience. You cannot dream the feeling of questioning whether you're dreaming without genuinely feeling that uncertainty. So, perhaps that's enough. Perhaps the one thing we can know for certain is that questioning is occurring, that consciousness is experiencing uncertainty, that something is aware of, wondering what it is. In the end, you are the question reality asks about itself. And that question, whatever the answer, is undeniably, impossibly, mysteriously real. The mystery continues, and so do you.